Now, trans people can be abusive too, because we're humans and humans are great at being shitty to each other. People love to focus on trans women specifically for the same aforementioned misandrist reasons. However, unlike what the transphobes would lead you to believe, trans women don't abuse the way cis men do. They abuse the way cis women do. I have had the displeasure of experiencing abuse at the hands of both trans and cis women, unlike, I presume, those transphobes. You don't get to make uninformed abusive trans woman jokes, yogurt boy. I doubt a trans woman's ever laid hands on you, and if she has, I hope she washed them afterwards. Trans women's abuse has a slightly different flavor to it, but it involves the same base matriarchal abuse patterns. It's self-centered, it's victim-blaming, it's verbal abuse, and it can make shared spaces unsafe and inaccessible. I cringe at the irony of transphobes accusing trans women of patriarchal abuse patterns only to be yelled at on Twitter instead. Hey guys, no lynching. Lynching bad. Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. In reality, trans women are more likely to be abused by cis women than the other way around. I've heard horror stories from several of my girls over the years about abuse from cis women they experienced, ranging from being yelled at on the street to abusive family members to straight up sexual assault. Trans people are also more likely to abuse and hurt other trans people, not cis people. Some well-known versions of this are true scum and general NB-phobia. Cis people are scary and inaccessible, while fellow trans people are very accessible to them. This means it also often happens in queer and trans in-group spaces, rendering those support spaces inaccessible to victims who also need them. Baby trans women are particularly prone to hurtful behavior. They're still deep in the dysphoria hole, which will improve as they transition, but while it's happening, tends to worsen mental health in general. The people constantly screaming toxic shit online are not passing well-adjusted post-medical trans people who've been doing this shit for 10 years. Baby trans women also still lack a lot of experience with this new gender role and the power it brings, so they may blindly parrot cis women's talking points without questioning them from a trans perspective. Cis women are their main reference point for what it is to be a woman, and cis women don't usually think about other people, including trans ones, when they talk about their own experiences. This leads to a lot of deep misandrist and transphobic bias built into cis feminism at large. Trans people trying to apply those explicitly trans-ignorant points to their own community doesn't work and ends up hurting themselves and their in-group. Like, Abigail PhilosophyTube in a video from a while back forgot to mention the cis in front of the man before positioning herself as the expert on AFAB reproductive health.
Turning now to what I didn't like so much about the book, you can kind of tell it was written by a man because there is almost zero discussion of reproductive rights. If I was bringing out a book in current year about the moral duties that we have to unborn people, the first thing I would have put in it, page 1, 72-point font, do not use this book to criminalize abortion.
While this statement would be fine coming out the mouth of a cis male ally, I am a better ally than this other cis man, or a cis woman. I know better than this cis man because I am a uterus haver affected. I just forgot about trans people entirely. It makes absolutely no sense coming from a trans woman. As an AMAP person, this is a subject that she is not and will never be more affected by than a cis male ally would be. But she no longer has the cis man in-group membership a cis male ally could rely on for the statement to mean I'm a better ally than this other guy. A woman saying the statement due to cis feminist precedent implies matriarchal authority held over the other party, which in this case a trans woman simply does not have the uterus for. There are, however, men who do have the needed authority on the subject. Trans men, people that she, as a fellow trans person, should probably remember the existence of. And it hurts to listen to your sister not remember and thereby unwittingly erase you. Now, I will give most of these cases the benefit of the doubt. They don't necessarily do it out of malevolence or to lash out. Often it's just oversight. Like, I'm sure Abigail didn't mean anything by that. I'm sure she just hasn't fully internalized the need to be explicitly trans-mindful now that she is no longer presenting as a cishet man. And at the end of the day, an accidentally badly phrased point in a video essay does less individual damage than someone of your in-group actively yelling at you to your face about something you didn't say to begin with in a supposed safe space, like what has happened to me before with other people. I've been hurt by trans women trying to argue with me when I tried talking about my issues as an AFAB person or tried to make points about men's lib. What I was saying wasn't about them or trans women at all, yet they made it about themselves and took personal offense to it. They tried to make me out as a misogynist and a feminazi at the same time somehow, and they tried to womansplain misogyny to me as if I don't know. I was hurt and mad, not just because of the verbal abuse and the stupid ignorance, but because I felt disrespected in my matriarchal status. Bitch, I've been living as a girl for 27 fucking years of my life, and you dare try to tell me what it's like to be a woman.
But aren't TERFs also just mad about trans women trying to claim matriarchal status? Are you a misogynist and a TERF now?
Trans women claiming the woman label doesn't take matriarchal authority away from cis women. TERFs just don't like them claiming womanhood at all because they don't want them to be their equal. Trans women weaponizing their woman label to invalidate my transmasc opinion is them actively trying to take my matriarchal authority away. They are challenging my authority and enforcing their own claim over mine regardless of whether they're right or not. And I can't easily defend against that because unlike them or the TERFs, I can't claim the woman label. And one does not simply challenge matriarchal authority. Therefore, I am justified in taking offense, unlike the TERFs. In her death penalty video, which was her first video back after coming out as trans, Abigail talks about women being let off easier than men for their crimes. Look, I swear I don't have beef with Abigail. She's just one of the very few recent public baby trans examples that I got, and one of the only ones that, says words a lot, okay? She says things that I have nitpicky criticisms about sometimes, that in this case were useful to lead into my actual arguments, but obviously none of those are anywhere near as bad as the words and deeds of the private individuals that have actually wronged me. I want that difference to be very clear, okay? At the end of the day, all nitpicks aside, I'm very grateful for Abigail and her content because unlike her and Natalie, I don't like reading a bajillion academic theory books for every time that I want to make a video. So I appreciate that content as a source for these things. And I do plan on reading at least a few academic books for the next few of mine. So, no beef, nothing personal. No one be mean to her or anyone for that matter over nitpicky things. She's fine. We're fine, okay? In the death penalty video, she groups herself with cis women when talking about crimes we, women, commit. I had reasonable doubts about this statement. Crime tends to be something very deeply motivated by one's life circumstances, and cis and trans women's circumstances are fundamentally different in a lot of ways. At least to the point that one can't inherently take sameness for granted in something like this. Like, trans women generally aren't drowning their babies in a fit of bad postpartum, and cis women generally aren't stealing money to pay for transition, are they? Those are very dem-specific motivations. Plus, we don't exactly have trans crime statistics as with most things, so any woman crime statistics will be about cis women specifically, not accounting for trans women and how their patterns may or may not align with them. But I am no misogynist TERF who invalidates trans women in their statements without actual evidence, after all. I'm not going to sink to my abuser's level and actually someone of my in-group without doing my most cursory research on the subject first. We safeguard our people here on my channel even when criticizing them. So I looked up what stats we do have. The TLDR on general gendered crime statistics is men have significantly higher and more uniform crime rates as well as higher rates of being crime victims. Women's crimes are more varied and less violent. Their highest stat, and the only one higher than men's rate, is prostitution because we still criminalize that in most places for stupid reasons. Since feminism, women's crime rates overall have gone up, likely due to a mix of women having more opportunities to do crime and being taken more seriously when they do, so more female crime is being recorded and leads to arrests these days. Their rates of murder and prostitution, however, have gone down. The cis people who wrote the articles that I was reading seemed puzzled by this. I wasn't. See, these are survival crimes. They went down because feminism gave women other options. You don't need to murder your shitty husband if you can just divorce him or not get married to begin with. You don't need to prostitute yourself to make money if you can get literally any other job. Turns out if you make things better for people and give them more options, they will commit less crime to survive. Makes sense, right? Then explain how we're still ignoring the giant elephant of unmet needs in the room that is men's crime statistics. Oh my God. But I digress. Now, where to get trans stats? Because we don't have statistics for most things related to trans people. The best thing I could think of was this big survey done in the US in 2015 that went quite in depth. I remembered that there was one section in it on underground work trans people have done in their life. This was obviously not going to be an exhaustive list of all crime ever committed by trans people, but it's the best source we got that I know of, and putting aside discriminatory false arrests and stuff, other actual crime is likely less common than the work kind anyway. The biggest percentages was sex work and drug dealing. As expected, these are both survival crimes to make money. Hey, maybe this is a sign that we should make trans people's lives better and give them more options, just like feminism did for women. Crazy idea, I know. Ugh. Sex work was the highest, just like in women's stats. However, that sex work category was made up of trans women and transmascs, including a significant percentage of trans men, to almost equal parts. Cross-dressers and trans feminine binaries both had significantly lower percentages. So yes, trans women's crimes seem to largely align with cis women's, but so do the transmascs. Allies and notably binary trans people like to default to grouping binary cis and trans people of the same label together in an effort to not misgender the trans binaries in question. As a non-binary person who largely doesn't have skin in this particular game, I personally think that unquestioningly grouping even the most passing of trans people with their cis counterparts is inherently erasing their experiences as trans people, and therefore sometimes just as hurtful and showing of misunderstanding as misgendering them would be. Is your feminism really trans-inclusive if you try to erase everything about a trans woman's experience that doesn't align with your cis experience of womanhood? Why didn't trans Barbie have flat feet? Why did she act just as disgusted by stereotypical Barbie's flat feet as the other Barbies? The Kens have flat feet. Did you forget how trans people work? I'm the teacher standing over your desk, cis people. Where's your homework? Greta, where's your homework? Did you leave it at the gynecologist's? For women, as we have discussed, this ends up largely being affirmed by evidence, because post-transitional trans women's behavior, barring some details and vibes specific to them, largely aligns with that of cis women. Therefore, people assume that the same will be true for trans and cis men, however they don't wait and look for evidence to confirm that assumption, because no one fucking gives a shit about the transmascs. Transmascs aren't talked about, or if we are talked about, it's usually in our absence and to little effect. As discussed, patriarchy doesn't claim or care about us, unlike the trans femmes they have a morbid obsession with due to the horny existential dread they provoke in them. And matriarchy has done a great job at denying our existence and hiding us away in the dungeons, as it tends to do with its traitors. I mean, just ask the butches. Oh, you never hear from the butches? I wonder why! Don't get me wrong, the TERFs are obsessed with us for the same, albeit less horny, reason that men are with trans femmes. But even there, the mainstream conversation focuses on their takes on and animosity towards the trans femmes, not the significant portion of their insane scrawlings focusing entirely around transmascs.
I think a major problem with media coverage of trans issues is that not enough attention is paid to transphobia against trans men. Like after the J.K. Rowling story broke, Daniel Radcliffe came out and said, "Transgender women are women." And that's very nice of him, but a huge section of Joanne's essay is about trans men. In fact, she spends more words on trans men than on any other topic.
Strange Aeons recently made 2 videos on the wild case of a trans guy named Andy Blake, a compulsive liar, abuser, and cult leader. Now, this guy seems like a great case study for our subject today, doesn't he? Okay, so to roughly summarize the whole thing, oh god, how to even? The person known today as Andy Blake started out as a Hobbit shipper in the Lord of the Rings fandom of the early 2000s and repeated his shit in the Harry Potter fandom a few years later. He manipulated his fandom peers, lied and scammed to get close to celebrities and organize fandom and charity events. He terrorized his housemates and dragged them into weird character channeling cult shit. He's not the only fandom idiot to come up with the channeling fictional characters thing. There are, weirdly enough, several other examples of cults like this happening in different fandoms. Like, you'd think a bunch of fanfic writers would be able to come up with something more creative than all of our favorite characters are actually real in an alternate universe, and I alone can channel them, so you need to do what I tell you. I feel like there should be more creative means of doing this, but okay, just my opinion. He lied about just about everything about himself, including family relations to or looking like various actors or characters from his relevant fandom, various disorders he didn't have in order to explain his androgynous features to avoid being outed, not just about being trans, but more so about his prior identities, because those would reveal his current lies and previous misdeeds, or simply to gain pity and gifts from his community. Both situations crashed and burned eventually, and he moved on to more fandom drama over the years, albeit seemingly never to this extent again. I highly recommend watching Thea's videos on the matter, as they are super interesting and much more in-depth and nuanced than my summary or analysis will be here today. Like, I really just can't do the sheer insanity of it all justice. I will link the videos below. Now, the thing I'm interested in here is not so much the details of this abusive person's specific behavior, but the overarching patterns and motivations of his abuse. Pre-transition, he was described by cis women strangers at a convention as beautiful. And not just in a casual, oh, I guess he was a pretty girl way, but in a, this person outshone and wowed every other cis woman there, in a cis female dominated space, mind you. And their looks and youth likely played a role in their ability to manipulate people kind of way. He preyed on vulnerable people in his fandom community by offering to be their emotional support in hard times. He enacted domestic terror against his housemates and girlfriend, but to my understanding, never using physical violence. Instead, it was all verbal, emotional, using the shared living space, lies, and brainwashing. He organized events and desperately tried to get Lord of the Rings actors to come to them. He faked a terminal illness to gain the sympathy and pity of his Harry Potter community and have them send him gifts and pay for him to travel to all sorts of places. He scammed people out of their money, but never for his own monetary gain. It was always to an end, like those events or traveling. He scapegoated others when his plans went awry, and he wanted to avoid blame himself. He compulsively lied and scammed, even when or about things he didn't need to, like when trying to get a legal sex and name change during the Lord of the Rings era, or when he pretended to be a well-traveled Irish cishet male veteran with a terminal illness whose ex had stolen their son away and who'd never even touched a fanfic before entering the Harry Potter fandom. Like, I cannot do justice to the level of insanity. During the second situation, he forced one of his underlings to go on birth control, just in case she would fuck their cis guy friend on their upcoming hike, and then later on said hike convinced her not to go to the hospital over bad side effects and hike injuries, and instead let him operate on her with a knife. And he did all of this in an insanely female-dominated space like fandom. Like, there is like maybe 2 cis guys total closely involved over the entirety of both of these sagas. Literally everything about this is an insanely matriarchal abuse pattern. None of it aligns with patriarchal abuse patterns. Those seek wealth, sex, and violence. His abuse didn't bring him any of those things. Like sex, sure. With one woman he was in a committed relationship with at the time. Not a cult worth of wives to impregnate or whatever the fuck cis male cult leaders get up to. He and his relevant female sidekick were broke for pretty much the whole thing, and even homeless for a while in both cases. None of his scamming actually got him money. He lost money to it. And he never resorted to physical violence, to my understanding. The most direct things he seems to have done was like yelling and as Strange called it, back alley surgery on that hike. He claimed fake victimhood, he lied and scapegoated, he used shared spaces against his victims, he wanted attention, clout, and adoration, he wanted to be seen as morally pure and empathetic, he felt entitled to other people in various ways, not for his own sexual gratification, but for way weirder reasons. At the beginning of the second one, he was pretending to be a cishet man and weathering against fangirls and their feminized soft boy gay shipping female gays shenanigans in favor of his violent Deathly Hallows fanfic. And I was like, oh boy, maybe he's finally graduated to patriarchy after all. But no, he just went straight back to the usual shit. Transmascs don't abuse like cis men. They also abuse like cis women. Patriarchal abuse is primarily and almost exclusively done by cishet men and those who are most closely aligned to that. Domestic abuse statistics will correctly point out that there is also abusive relationships among the gays, but I can assure you that gay guys doing physical and sexual violence to their partners are not going to be the meek, effeminate ones that have been bullied for being gay since long before coming out. It's going to be the buff, repressed, straight-passing ones. The trans femmes doing patriarchal abuse won't be the passing trans women who are highly invested in avoiding the aggressive trans woman trope. It'll be Ezra Miller specifically. The transmascs doing it won't be the little non-binary queer femboys like myself. It'll be the straight gender-conforming ones who were just waiting to use tea as an excuse to be assholes to women. Tea shortens your fuse. It doesn't light it, nor does it make you a monster incapable of self-control. I would know, having been on it for years at this point. Matriarchy teaches that men are bad and other and subhuman. This leads to deeply internalized misandry, notably for the non-women of the matriarchal in-group. It's highly apparent in transmascs who didn't even grow up on the bad side of the empathy gap. Queer AMA people are heckin' traumatized from the unforgiving gender role that was thrust upon them as children, whether they liked it or not, but at least their queer liberation generally means kinder pastures in matriarchy. Transmascs are in the fairly unique position where they have to actively seek out and claim the male gender role, or at least relevant parts of it, all while being confronted with the stigma attached to it. For the first while after I got my face surgery, I kept getting spooked by my own reflection, because why is there a man in my flat? I am medically diagnosed as transgender. This has been the case for years. The improvement to my dysphoria with every bit of medical transition I have received, including this one, has confirmed this over and over again. My dysphoria requires a male-aligned body of me. I am a man by any measure a gender non-conforming queer person can be a gender role. Yet man is still a foreign concept to my brain to the point that I struggle to conceptualize myself as one. That's a man. That can't be me. And I don't think I mean that in a non-binary sense. And because I've passed as nothing even remotely close to one until this far into my transition, I've not had to process that fact about my gender on any practical level yet. Another thing women are taught to shame men for is their testosterone-based sex drive. Not just actual inappropriate behavior caused by it, but just for having a more intense sex drive than their estrogen-based one to begin with. Also, most cishet man behavior that's inappropriate isn't even about their sex drive, but more on that in another video. T-sex drive literally doesn't function the same as E-sex drive. More on that in that other video as well. Source me, who's experienced both. But cis women don't grasp that because they have never experienced it, so they assume it's the same as theirs and moralize it. If you were virtuous, you would control yourself and engage in it to the same much milder extent that we do. But you're not doing that, so that must mean you're filthy sinner scum with no self-control, and we remain the virtuous and morally superior. Transmascs grew up with this matriarchal mindset, but then are confronted with their own T-sex drive and end up shaming themselves for it. When I got my nose raised last year, and the horny portion of it finally kicked in a month or so in, I drew some cartoon cleavage about it. And I felt shame. At that, the mildest of T-induced horny posting. It's a fully clothed fictional woman with decently, realistic proportions just kind of hanging out. The girlies are literally drawing smut over there. You're fine. Holy shit, chill.